Hi guys, Josh here. Welcome to Frames Per Second. Today we're on the Gold Coast and we're going to be shooting some Velvia 50 finally on my Pentax K1000. Now this is a film stock I've been meaning to shoot for a while. I've had this roll for like 2 years, maybe more. But I'm finally getting around to it because we're finally somewhere that's nice, bright and sunny so I can actually use it and get decent exposure. And so that's what we're going to do today. It's been compared a lot to Kodachrome as far as the stocks that are available, so I am looking at that saturation, maybe even that bit of magenta tinge to it, but we'll see what happens, so let's get to it.
So I have shot Velvia 100 before, and what I found with Velvia 50 was that it was obviously had finer grain, but it was also a lot more saturated, and it definitely was a lot more blue in the shadows and a bit pinker in the highlights than I was expecting, but it still turned out pretty good. I just randomly found this motel when I was driving to meet my family by the beach, and yeah, it's kind of cool on the outside. And also out back it did have these nice red doors which you can really see popped here, and I do find I think I like the color more with direct sunlight on it rather than in the shade, but that's because I do like a warmer look than a cooler look. But I found that the Velvia really popped the most when shooting nature, and so I do think it might be a better landscape film than street film, because here the leaves really turned out gorgeous. Part of it could be the metering of my camera. I was using the in-camera meter, which definitely could have added to it, but even here I thought this turned out a bit better in color than the artificial stuff, like coming up with this basketball court. I also think the metering for this was a bit off because even though it is a blue court, it was quite reflective with the light, so my meter was a little bit off. There's definitely not a lot of latitude. You do start losing a lot in the shadows, like here the sand's nice and bright, but then the shadows there, it's getting a bit grainy. Classic Phoebe can, very Australian. And yeah, like you can see here that the roll off is quite drastic as far as the lack of shadow detail mixed with the highlights there. And like every film photographer, we've got to take photos of vintage cars, it's the law. But here my metering was a bit off as well because the car was very reflective, so when I did move in closer, like here, yeah, it definitely metered more for the highlights than the darker parts of the car. And even here you can see how much there isn't any detail in the shadows. But yeah, some of these shots turned out pretty nicely, but it's not my favorite. This was definitely metered a bit too dark, but yeah. Here I was trying to see how that light flared, but it didn't turn out to flare. I feel like this is the best exposed shot of the car, and I don't know why I took this shot, but I guess maybe I thought the vest popped a bit. And here we are by this little motel that's kind of got a vintage look to it. I think the grass and the lawn chairs there turned out the best, and it really does pop quite nicely, though it is a little bit more intense in color than I was expecting because the yellow was definitely not that orange. But then also the stuff in the shade here was pretty solid. I find this detail of the grass looks quite nice, and so I do think this is more of a film for taking shots of natural things like landscapes and even just like close-up details of nature. I found that those things kind of popped the best, because even here with the sand being so reflective, my metering was a bit off as well. This shot actually turned out pretty decent, but yeah, it definitely is a bit more magenta-y in the highlights than I would have liked. But this shot actually turned out quite right. It's a decently evenly exposed shot, and you still get a decent amount of detail in there. Unfortunately, it's really expensive. I think it would be amazing to shoot large format with this, and I think in Japan you can still get some 4x5 sheets, This shot I do quite like. And at the price it is, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's worth it. I'd say go Velvia 100 because it's a bit cheaper and you get an extra stop of light. But it is a nice film, especially if you like slide film and like intense saturation. It's definitely the most vivid of all the slide films out. Give it a try, but I wouldn't necessarily say go out of your way to buy a heap of it.
So that's all the time we have for today. Let me know your thoughts on the images and the camera in the comments below. Feel free to like and subscribe, turn on those post notifications so you know when there's a new episode. Anyway, I'm Josh. This has been Frames Per Second. Just get out there, shoot some fun.